vorrei anche ringraziare la dottoressa Campanale che ha organizzato questo incontro e mi ha invitato di fare questo intervento. Io capisco italiano abbastanza bene, lo parlo così, ma per fare questo intervento non sono in grado di fare intervento sull'artificial intelligence in italiano, ma lo capisco. Vorrei solo, prima di dire che professore Stefani ha fatto un'osservazione sul penale, che è molto importante, forse mi risvolgo a questo punto. Anche il professore Pagano, che ha menzionato questa cosa filosofica, questa questione filosofica, quanto dell'umano rimane in questa nuova tecnologia, e mi rivolgo anche a queste domande. Ma per adesso, from now on, I want to set out the plan for my lecture. So what I'm going to do in this lecture is first to describe the technological background that is happening today. Secondly, to describe and explain the use of artificial intelligence in the law, what is happening today, what is already taking place. I'm not talking about the future at this stage, but about what is already taking place. And thirdly, I will address the impact that current uses of artificial intelligence are likely to have on the legal profession and on the administration of justice more generally. Finally, I will move into a more speculative part of the lecture to discuss the possibility of more extensive use of artificial intelligence, that is to say, robot judges that are robots, artificial intelligence judges and lawyers, and the long-term effect on the administration of justice and on the legal world as we know it. Can I stop here for a minute and ask you whether you can hear me? Yeah. Because the picture that I had before in front of me has disappeared, and I now
In italiano ti senti?
Yeah.
I've got yoga in front of me.
Sentiamo benissimo.
Okay. So let me start by explaining what artificial intelligence systems are at the moment and what I'm effectively, there may be others, but what I'm effectively dealing with. I am concentrating on machine learning, the way in which machine can learn to perform tasks which require a reaction which is highly contextualized. In other words, which cannot be programmed in advance. So there are at the moment 3 methods of machine learning, how machines can learn to perform tasks. In other words, to respond to circumstances as they arise. So the first system is supervised learning, where humans label some data, and the machine learns to recognize this data. The machine creates algorithms, recognizes statistical patterns in the data, and can then manipulate that data. So I'll give you an example in law, what is done already with artificial intelligence. In England, for example, in litigation, each litigant has got to disclose to his opponent all the relevant documents. Nowadays, because of email and digital communications, there are hundreds of thousands, millions of documents which need to be reviewed. So in order to identify what is relevant and what is not relevant, lawyers would have a sample of, say, 10,000 relevant documents. The machine would scan it and create an algorithm. The second step would be for the lawyers to give the machine another 10,000 documents, half of them relevant, half of them not relevant, irrelevant. And the machine has to recognize which is relevant. And when the machine makes a mistake, the mistake is corrected. So this way, the machine learns to make no mistakes. And after a while, the machine makes fewer mistakes than lawyers, and of course can scan this document much faster. The second system is reinforcement learning, where the machine doesn't learn any patterns to begin with. There is no human labeling to begin with, but the machine is rewarded every time it achieves a particular purpose. So in that way, it learns to maximize the benefits, and this system is very good for trading short-term disadvantages against long-term benefits. For example, this method is used in competition between supermarkets in pricing their products. And lastly, there is unsupervised learning, where the machine simply scans an enormous amount of data and learns to recognize patterns in this data. What you do with the patterns is then up to us. So, for example, this system is used by credit card companies to recognize unusual transactions. So every now and again, I'll get a phone call from my credit card company say, have you been to Hong Kong? Have you spent money in Hong Kong yesterday? Because it's an unusual pattern of my life. Now, these systems that have machine learning of the kind that I've just described has got to be distinguished from old-fashioned AI, from symbolic systems, so symbolic AI or expert systems, where a programmer programs a machine to reach a particular outcome through an inductive tree reasoning. So you've got a number of questions, you say yes, no, you are led to further questions, and eventually you get a result. But this result is pre-programmed by the program designer. I'm not addressing this sort of technology. I'm focusing on the technology, on proper artificial intelligence and machine learning. Now, technology, this kind of technology is already used in legal practice, both in the UK and the United States and possibly other countries. But at the moment, it has one limit, it has one obstacle which limits its usefulness, because the law is expressed in language. Arguments are formed in language. Judgments are given in language. And machines are not yet very good at processing language. Natural language processing is still in the future. Machines are getting better in processing language in particular fields, but machines cannot yet understand speech. And the reason why they cannot yet understand speech is because of they can understand the structural language, they are very good at syntax, they are quite good at semantics, in other words, meaning of sentences, but they are not yet good at pragmatics. That is to say, the meaning in context. The contextual meaning is not something the machines are yet very good at, except in defined fields. But although this is in the future, there is no doubt that machines will be able to understand language in before long. Some people say 50 years. I'm sure it's going to be a long sooner. So what are the applications of machine technology that are taking place now at this very time? So I have already described one. In England, in heavy commercial litigation, AI is used in order to determine relevance. That is already done. Why is it done? Because lawyers in England charge by the hour and without an upper limit. So why should customers have to pay lawyers to sit in expensive offices and read documents where machines can do it much faster? So there is pressure from large companies, corporations in commercial litigation to use machine intelligence to provide this particular legal service, because they know from their own businesses what machines can achieve. So this is one usage. Another usage of machine intelligence, of artificial intelligence, is in document review. That is to say, in reviewing large quantities of documents in order to discover unusual clauses, unusual contractual provisions. So, for example, it is used in non-disclosure agreements. Non-disclosure agreements are agreements made between competitors when one competitor proposes to take over or invest in another competitor. Before they conclude the final contract, they've got to carry out due diligence investigations, find out whether the business is good, how much it sells, how much it spends, and so on and so forth. So there is a need to disclose to each other sensitive commercial information. In order to make sure that this sensitive information is not abused, if the transaction doesn't go through, there are complex agreements. And tests have been done in the United States, and machines can review these agreements and discover problem in the agreements more reliably than lawyers and far faster, much faster. So here is another example where we have machines being used today. Another use of machines is in predicting outcome. If you can predict the outcome of litigation, you can save a lot of money. You don't have to go to court. You don't have to spend on lawyers. If you can predict an outcome, you can settle on satisfactory terms with the other side. That's already used, and very good results have been achieved both in the United States and in Europe with regard to the European Court of Justice. Another use which is being employed today is risk assessment. In parole and bail applications, machines are used in order to determine the risk of reoffending, particularly in the United States. The decision is, of course, that of the judge, but the judge would consult a machine in order to assess the risk. Machines are much better at assessing this sort of risk. Finally, in England and in Canada and in a number of other places, the government is introducing an online court. Now, an online court is not fully artificial intelligence, but it is going that way. The purpose of an online court is to help litigants who cannot afford lawyers to produce a claim form, that is the citazione, and a defense, scomparsa di risposta. The machine helps these people do that, so they can then deposit these documents online. They can deposit their evidence online, and the system will decide how to progress the case. Now, as I said, this is not exactly artificial intelligence, but this is already the first step towards a proper online court, a court which does everything digitally. Finally, there are two other, in fact, systems. One is hybrid dispute resolution. Hybrid dispute resolution, not used by the courts, but used by market platforms such as Amazon and eBay and other market platforms. So when a dispute arises between sellers and buyers, the dispute will be referred to a machine in the first instance, and the machine will decide it. If the machine finds the dispute too complicated, it can escalate it to a human to decide. And of course, there is a right of appeal against machine decision. Finally, there is already a move to make machine-friendly laws. In other words, laws which can be automatically, without the need for court intervention, can be automatically enforced and obeyed. The best example is self-driving cars. Self-driving cars will have an inbuilt law. You don't break the law. You don't go against the red light. You don't go faster than the permitted speed, and so on and so forth. And this kind of system can be implemented in any kind of machinery that uses computer technology. So a lot of health and safety regulations would be self-enforcing. What are the advantages and disadvantages of this kind of technological innovation in the legal field? In the legal field, there are three problems with artificial intelligence. One is the lack of transparency, the black box effect. What happens with artificial intelligence and machine? You input data and you get a result, you get an outcome. There is no explanation, no reasons given. And that creates difficulty for a legal system which requires reasons. It is a fundamental right, human right, fundamental right to have a reasoned judgment. So how can you have a judgment which has no reasons you can't appeal against? That is a problem, but again, it's not an insurmountable problem because systems are continually developed in order to overcome this problem. So you can either interrogate the algorithm that produced the result, or the algorithm itself can provide reasons. The other thing that people talk about is bias, machine bias. But that, again, is if artificial intelligence bases an algorithm on biased data, obviously the bias would be reflected in the algorithm. But at least the algorithm has got one advantage over humans. Once you have detected the bias, you can take it out of the algorithm. You can't take bias out of the human mind because it's unconscious normally. Finally, it is said there is a problem with the application of standards as distinguished from rules. A legal rule is a rule, the answer you can, which is either broken or not broken. So it's binary. Let us take the example of speed limit. Either a person exceeded the speed limit or didn't exceed the speed limit. Either a person paid the tax that they needed to pay, they were lawfully obliged to pay, or they didn't pay. There is no in between. But what about the application of standards, for example, reasonableness, or fairness, or honesty, good faith? How can machines do it? And again, the problem is not insurmountable because machines can learn to apply standards, because standards are not arbitrary. When you apply a standard, you are not applying an arbitrary standard. You are applying a standard which is understood and well practiced. What are the advantages? I've discussed the disadvantages of artificial intelligence. What are the advantages? Well, the advantages are obvious. Firstly, cheaper. Once you train a machine to do it, it does it very well and very reliably, very consistently, and much cheaper. And I've given you the examples of documentary review and discovery. Review of documents for relevance. And what is happening in this country and also in the United States, that pressures, economic pressures, come both from low-end user and high-end users. In England, legal services are very expensive. It's very expensive to retain a lawyer for litigation. Very expensive, because lawyers are paid by the hour and without an upper limit. And top lawyers can charge maybe £1,000 an hour. So that's a lot. And they, of course, control the number of hours that they spend. So there is pressure from on the legal system, on the government, to provide access to justice at affordable cost. And that's why the government has now introduced this online court, this embryonic artificial intelligence institution, which is not yet using artificial intelligence, but it is pointing that way. It is very likely that low value, simple cases would be decided that way by machines. And economic pressures come also from above, from top users, from corporations who realize the advantages of artificial intelligence and are not prepared, as I've explained, to pay hourly fees to lawyers in expensive offices when machines can do the same job and better in minutes. What are the likely effects of these on the legal profession? Well, firstly, where machines are already being used, lawyers are going to lose skills. So, for example, in disclosure, now machines review documents for relevance. So, you know, the way we used to train lawyers here when they started their career, they would be trained in discovery to review documents, decide what is relevant, how to connect documents to a particular argument, and so on, or in reviewing all sorts of contracts. Since now machines do it, they will not be able to develop these skills. Secondly, another possibility, and this is already happening in the United States and to some extent in England, is competition from outside the legal profession. The monopoly of lawyers over legal services is being threatened. It's being threatened in England by the online court. The government now says to people, you don't need lawyers. Go and present your claim through the help of a machine that we are providing you. And in the United States, all sorts of non-lawyer organizations are beginning to provide legal services. For example, legal research. They say, why do you need lawyers to do research, to go to libraries? We can do it for you in minutes. Machines are very good because machines can scan the whole of the literature in minutes, all the relevant articles, all the relevant precedents, and so on. So the legal profession is coming under considerable pressure. What the big legal firms in London are doing is to develop their own proprietary artificial intelligence systems in order to compete for the business of big corporations. So given this given these developments, given this line of travel, the question arises, what is likely to happen? Now, I want to emphasize one thing, that we cannot control what is likely to happen completely, because it happens gradually. At every stage, there is a small step, which is not threatening, which is not revolutionary, and which seems to be obvious, especially economically. When I've given you examples of lots of steps that are already happening, the online court in England, the use of machines for discovery and document disclosure, the use of machines for assessing recidivism, for assessing the risk of reoffending, all sorts of things are happening already. And because they're happening in an unplanned, unsupervised way, gradual way, they take their own course. They've got their own momentum and their own dynamics. So let's think that we can decide the future, but we can think about it and we can take certain measures. And now, what is the likely, or what is a possible scenario in the future? One possible scenario is that machines begin to understand language. So the problem of natural language processing is the prospect that natural language processing will be now resolved by machine, that machines would be able to understand language, to understand what's out there on the internet or out there in the world. Once they understand that, once machine can speak like us, then machines can become lawyers. They can construct an argument. So why would how can the public have faith in a machine lawyer? How can we test whether machines are any good? Well, the test is very simple. We get machines to write the case to write pleadings, citazione, comparsa di risposta, and we get humans to do the same in the same case, and we give these samples, these documents, to judges who don't know whether the document was written by a machine or by a human. And once the judges cannot distinguish between humans and machines, then machines can do as well as humans. And machines don't have to be as good as the best lawyers in order to be attractive. They just have to be as good as an average lawyer. Because people would say, why pay 10 times more in order to get the best lawyer when I can pay a fraction of it and get a perfectly decent machine service? So once machines can become lawyers, then there is no reason why machines shouldn't become also judges. How would we test whether machines are as good as judges? We get machines to listen to a case or to read the documents in a case and produce a judgment, and we get judges to produce a judgment. And then we give these documents to a panel who don't know which is a judge for blind testing. It's called blind testing. You don't know which document was written by a machine, which document was written by a human. And if they can't distinguish, then machines can become judges. Now, once machines become judges, we have big problems. And the problem is to do, firstly, with the adversarial system. Because the machine that the claimant employs has got to be more or less the same machine that is a judge, that the court employs, because they've got to speak to each other. They've got, just as lawyers have got to produce arguments that convince judges, so machines would have to produce arguments that convince machine judges. In order to do that, we have got to have a shared culture, a shared background of terms of reference, a shared legal system, effectively. So when a claimant will go to her machine and say, look, input all the data and say to the machine, what are my prospects of success? And the machine will say to the claimant, your prospect of success on the basis of what you have given me are 80%. Then the defendant will go to her machine, and the defendant's machine would say to the defendant, you have got 80% chances of success. But at some point, the machines will have to speak to each other. Once they speak to each other, they come to the same conclusion, obviously, because they employ the same systems, as they must, just as lawyers operate within the same system that the court operates, so the machines would have to do. Once they agree, these two machines agree, there is no need for a third machine. There is no need for a court. In other words, once we've got machines to do the judges, the adversarial tripartite structure of judge, claimant, and defendant becomes just one machine operation. No more adversarial system, just one machine operation. And what is the problem with one machine operation? The problem with one machine operation is that machines lack the first-person subjective. Machines only know, and here I'm addressing the point that Professor Pagano raised. Machines know only statistics. patterns, statistical patterns. They don't know feelings, ambitions, beliefs, faith, religious, moral, or anything else. They just deal with statistical patterns. And yet many judgments may and do involve moral judgment which is made against the background of how people feel about certain things, of what people's moral beliefs are, of what their ambitions are, and this sort of thing. So once we leave these such matters to machines, we move away from a world where humans judge humans, when humans can predict what other humans would decide. We begin to have problems of legitimacy. By legitimacy, I mean that the feeling, the public belief that legal institutions are entitled to demand compliance by virtue of their legality, by virtue of their legal and constitutional status. They can demand compliance, but they can demand compliance, and the public sentiment is, of course, informed and influenced by the fact that these institutions reflect them, that these institutions can give them equal concern and regard by virtue of being humans. And I'm not sure that machines can generate this kind of confidence and this kind of feeling in the public. What is the solution then? Well, some people say, look, cases of this kind which raise difficult moral questions are not very many. There are very few. And those you can escalate to human, you can leave to human decision-making. But the vast majority of cases can be dealt by machines. The trouble with this approach is that if machines if humans are left to decide only a minority of cases, then there is a real risk that people wouldn't be able to imagine or predict outcomes, because people can only think like the judges. If you go to a lawyer nowadays and ask a lawyer, what are my chances of success? The lawyer is able to predict the chances of success because the lawyer knows how the judge thinks, because the judge is a human like the lawyer. But if you are using machines for deciding even simple cases, it's very difficult to predict what the machine will do. No, I'm not saying that the machine outcome would be worse. All I'm saying is it would be difficult to predict because the machine has got much greater processing power. So, for example, the machine is able to base its decision on a very large amount of data. A machine will know all the precedents, all the literature, all the relevant materials. Well, no human can know all these relevant materials, and certainly not within the time frame in which it is necessary to produce a decision. So there's going to be an inevitable breach between the way rights are enforced and the human subject. And that, to my mind, is very dangerous. How we are able to resolve this? I'm not sure, because for two reasons. Firstly, because we can't control, for the reason I've given, we can't control the development, how things are progressing. It's just beyond our control. Secondly, today, it's very difficult to imagine, for certainly people in this group, it's very difficult to imagine that we would ever agree that a machine would decide our case. It's very difficult for us to imagine that. But people, the next generation, may not find it difficult to imagine, because the next generation is already doing everything online. It's already accepting all sorts of digital solution to their affairs. So I don't see why our resistance, our deeply felt resistance to being judged by a machine, I'm not sure that it will be felt by the next generation. So I'd be very interested to hear